The amber glow of the setting sun cast long shadows across the small town of Deer Lodge, Montana Territory, as the stagecoach rolled to a stop, its wheels kicking up dust that danced in the golden light. Tabitha Turner clutched her worn leather satchel tightly against her chest, her heart hammering with equal parts fear and determination. This remote frontier town, nestled in the shadow of the Flint Creek Range, would be her new home, or at least she prayed it would be. The year was 1872, and Tabitha had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to meet the man who had answered her advertisement in the matrimonial news. She smoothed down the skirt of her best traveling dress with trembling hands, wondering if Garrett Quinn would find her suitable. She had been honest in her letters, mostly honest, at least. There were some things a woman had to keep to herself, especially a woman with secrets etched permanently into her skin. As the driver helped her down from the coach, Tabitha adjusted the high collar of her dress and made certain the sleeves were properly buttoned at her wrists. No matter how brutal the Montana summer heat might become, she would remain covered. Her mysterious tattoo, the sweeping lines of ink that curled from her left shoulder down her back and disappeared beneath her corset, remained her closely guarded secret. It was a remnant of a past life she had fled, a beautiful but dangerous mark that tied her to people she could never see again. "Miss Turner," a deep voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see a tall man standing before her, hat respectfully removed to reveal thick sandy hair streaked with gold from the sun. His face was weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw softened by kind eyes the color of a summer sky. "This had to be Garrett Quinn." "Mr. Quinn," she replied, her voice barely audible above the bustle of the stagecoach station. He nodded and stepped forward, offering a calloused hand. "Folks just call me Garrett. Welcome to Deer Lodge." "Thank you," Tabitha said, placing her gloved hand in his. "I'm grateful you've come to meet me." Garrett Quinn had not expected someone quite so refined. The woman standing before him looked delicate, with porcelain skin and deep auburn hair peeking out from beneath her bonnet. Her eyes, though they were what caught him off guard. A rich, warm brown that seemed to hold stories she wasn't telling. "Let me take your bags," he said, lifting her trunk with ease. "My wagon's just down the street. Hope you don't mind a short walk." "Not at all," Tabitha replied, falling into step beside him. "After 3 days on that stagecoach, I welcome the opportunity to stretch my legs." As they made their way down the main street, Tabitha took in the frontier town that was to be her new home. Deer Lodge was larger than she had expected, with a handful of substantial buildings lining the dusty street: a general store, a small bank, a saloon, and what appeared to be a hotel. People moved about with purpose, some nodding respectfully to Garrett as they passed. "Your letters didn't do you justice, Miss Turner," Garrett said quietly as they walked. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Nor did yours, Mr. Quinn. You failed to mention you were the town's most distinguished citizen." A rumble of laughter escaped him. "Hardly that. I'm just a rancher who's been here long enough that folks know my name." He paused before a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 chestnut horses. "This is our ride. It's about 5 miles to the ranch." As he helped her onto the bench, his hand warm and steady at her elbow, Tabitha felt a rush of relief. The man seemed decent, and his eyes held no malice. Perhaps she had chosen well after all. The wagon rolled out of town, the buildings giving way to open country that stretched out beneath the vast Montana sky. Garrett handled the horses with confidence, his hands strong on the reins. "I should be forthright, Miss Turner," he said after they had traveled in silence for some time. "I'm not a wealthy man, but my ranch is doing well enough. I've got 300 acres, most of it good grazing land, a sturdy house that needs a woman's touch, and prospects that improve with each season. I can promise you'll never go hungry or cold, but I can't offer the luxuries you might be accustomed to in Boston." Tabitha turned to study his profile, strong against the backdrop of mountains and sky. "Mr. Quinn, I didn't come west seeking luxury. I came seeking a new beginning." Something in her voice must have revealed more than she intended, for he glanced at her sharply. Running from something, Miss Turner, she stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to cover her left shoulder where, beneath layers of clothing, the tattoo seemed to burn against her skin. Aren't we all in some way? The past has a way of shaping our futures, whether we wish it to or not. Garrett nodded slowly, turning his attention back to the road. Fair enough, we all have our reasons for the paths we choose. He cleared his throat. I should tell you, I've arranged for you to stay with Mrs. Hollister in town until the wedding. She's the preacher's widow, respectable as they come. I thought you might want some time to be certain of your choice before we proceed. The consideration in his gesture touched her. That's very thoughtful, Mr. Quinn. Garrett, he reminded her gently. Garrett, she echoed, testing the name on her tongue. And you must call me Tabitha if we are to be married. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face and reached his eyes. Tabitha, it suits you. The wagon continued its journey as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, painting the landscape in deepening shades of purple and gold. In the distance, Tabitha could make out the outline of a ranch house nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney, and several outbuildings clustered nearby. That's it, Garrett said, following her gaze. Quinn Ranch, not much to look at compared to Eastern standards, I reckon, but it's home. It looks wonderful, Tabitha said honestly, taking in the peaceful setting. As they drew closer, she could see that the house was larger than it had first appeared, a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A garden plot, already showing signs of early summer vegetables, stretched to one side, while a corral containing several horses stood to the other. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was far more than she had dared to hope for. I built most of it myself, Garrett said, a note of pride in his voice. Started with just a one-room cabin when I came out here 12 years ago, added on as I could. The upper floor just got finished last winter. It's impressive, Tabitha said. You've accomplished a great deal. Before Garrett could respond, a young man emerged from one of the outbuildings and waved. He jogged over as the wagon came to a stop in front of the house. This is Daniel, Garrett said. My foreman and right-hand man. Daniel, meet Miss Tabitha Turner from Boston. Daniel, a freckled man who couldn't be much older than 20, removed his hat and nodded respectfully. Madam, welcome to Quinn Ranch. Thank you, Daniel, she replied with a smile. Everything all right while I was gone? Garrett asked, jumping down from the wagon. Yes, sir. Though there's been another incident at the Wilkerson place. Cattle gone missing, same as before. Garrett's expression darkened. That's the third time this month. We'll discuss it later. He turned to help Tabitha down from the wagon. I'm just going to show Miss Turner around briefly before we head to Mrs. Hollister's. Daniel nodded and took the reins, leading the horses and wagon toward the barn. Trouble with rustlers? Tabitha asked as Garrett escorted her toward the house. Something like that, he replied grimly. Been happening all over the valley these past few months. Small operations like the Wilkersons get hit hardest. He shook his head. But that's not your concern. Come, let me show you what would be your home should you decide to accept my proposal in person. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy handcrafted furniture and clean, open spaces. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a massive hearth, a dining area, and a sitting room with bookshelves that surprised Tabitha with their contents, rows of leather-bound volumes that spoke of a man who valued more than just practical knowledge. You're a reader, she observed, running her fingers along the spines of several classics. Winter nights are long in Montana, Garrett replied with a slight smile. A man needs something to occupy his mind when the snow makes prisoners of us all. Tabitha nodded, thinking of the books she had carefully packed in her trunk. I brought a few volumes of my own. I hope you don't mind. I'd welcome the additions. He gestured toward the stairs. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs, mine, one I've prepared for you, and a third that's. Well, I hoped might be a nursery someday. The implication hung in the air between them, a reminder of what their arrangement was meant to achieve, not just companionship, but a family. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm again. "It's a lovely home, Garrett," she said sincerely. "You've created something to be proud of here." He studied her face for a moment, as if searching for something. "It needs a woman's touch, a child's laughter. It needs to be more than just a house." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. This was a man who wanted more than just a housekeeper or someone to warm his bed. He wanted a partner, a family. "I should get you to Mrs. Hollister's before dark," he said, breaking the moment. "You must be tired from your journey." The ride to town was quieter, both of them lost in their thoughts. Mrs. Hollister proved to be a kindly woman in her 60s who welcomed Tabitha warmly and showed her to a neat room at the back of her cottage. "I'll call for you tomorrow if that suits," Garrett said as he prepared to leave. "Perhaps around noon I could show you more of the town." "That would be lovely," Tabitha replied. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I nearly forgot. This is for you. It's not much, but—" Tabitha opened the box to find a simple gold band with a small pearl set into it. "It's beautiful. It was my mother's," he said softly. "You don't have to wear it yet, not until you're sure, but I wanted you to have it." Touched beyond words, she closed her hand around the box. "Thank you, Garrett. I'll treasure it, whatever my decision." After he left, Tabitha sat on the edge of the bed in her small room, turning the ring over in her fingers. It represented everything she had come west hoping to find: a new start, a chance at a normal life, safety. But could she truly have those things while keeping secrets? She undressed carefully, refusing Mrs. Hollister's offer of help with her corset laces. When she was finally alone, she stood before the small mirror in her chemise, twisting to see the reflection of her back. The tattoo began at her left shoulder, blade an intricate design of intertwined roses and thorns that cascaded down her back in a living tapestry of black ink. It was beautiful in its way, an artwork that had been forced upon her by a man who had seen her as property to be marked. Tabitha traced the outline of one rose with her fingertip, remembering the pain of the needles, the helplessness she had felt as the wealthy collector who had purchased her from the orphanage had her skin inked to match his collection of beautiful, marked women. She had escaped that life, fled across the country, but the tattoo remained a permanent reminder of what she had endured. If Garrett knew the truth that she had been essentially owned by one of Boston's most respected businessmen, kept as an object of beauty and fascination until she had managed to escape, would he still want her as his wife? Would anyone in this frontier town accept a woman with such a past, or with such a mark upon her body? She pulled her nightgown over her head, covering the evidence of her former life. Tomorrow she would see more of Deer Lodge and learn more about the man who might become her husband. For tonight, she would sleep and dream of a future where her secrets could remain safely buried. Morning came with the cheerful sounds of birdsong outside her window. Tabitha dressed carefully in a high-necked blue dress that Mrs. Hollister assured her was perfect for a day in town. The older woman helped her arrange her auburn hair in a simple but becoming style, chattering all the while about Garrett Quinn's excellent reputation. "You couldn't have chosen a finer man, my dear," Mrs. Hollister said, pinning the last strand in place. "He's respected by everyone in the county. Built that ranch from nothing, and now it's one of the most successful operations in the territory. And handsome, too, though I'm sure you noticed that yourself." She winked at Tabitha in the mirror. "He seems very kind," Tabitha replied cautiously. "Kind doesn't begin to cover it. When my Herbert passed, Garrett made sure I had firewood all winter. Wouldn't take a penny for it either. And when the Miller boy fell from his horse and broke his leg last year, it was Garrett who paid for the doctor from Helena to come treat him." Mrs. Hollister patted Tabitha's shoulder. "You do well with him, very well indeed." Precisely at noon, Garrett arrived at Mrs. Hollister's cottage, looking smart in clean clothes and freshly shaved. His eyes brightened when he saw Tabitha, and he offered his arm with a gallant gesture that made Mrs. Hollister beam approvingly. "I thought we might start with lunch at the hotel," he suggested as they walked. "The food's decent, and it's the only proper restaurant in town." Deer Lodge looked different in the clear light of day. Tabitha could see now that despite its frontier setting, it was a town with aspirations. Several of the buildings were constructed of brick rather than wood, and the main street boasted actual boardwalks rather than the packed dirt she had expected. "The town's growing," Garrett explained as they walked. "The railroad's planning to put a line through within the next few years. That'll change everything, bring more people, more opportunities." The hotel dining room was surprisingly elegant, with white tablecloths and real china plates. Garrett was clearly well known. The proprietor greeted him warmly and led them to a table by the window. Several other diners nodded in their direction, curious eyes taking in Tabitha's presence. "I should warn you," Garrett said quietly after they had ordered. "News travels fast in a small town. Everyone already knows who you are and why you're here." Tabitha tensed. "What exactly do they know?" "Just that you're a lady from Boston who answered my advertisement," he assured her quickly. "Nothing more, but they'll be curious and some might be a bit forward with their questions." As if on cue, a well-dressed woman approached their table, her keen eyes fixed on Tabitha. "Garrett Quinn, aren't you going to introduce me to your guest?" Garrett stood politely. "Mrs. Hargrove, this is Miss Tabitha Turner from Boston. Tabitha, Mrs. Hargrove owns the millinery shop and serves on the town council." "How lovely to meet you, Miss Turner, Mrs. Hargrove said, extending a hand. "We're all quite delighted that Garrett has finally decided to settle down. You must join our ladies' auxiliary. We meet every Tuesday afternoon." "Thank you for the invitation," Tabitha replied, unsure how to respond to the woman's presumption that her marriage to Garrett was a foregone conclusion. "Mrs. Hargrove is also our town's primary source of information," Garrett added dryly after the woman had moved on. "Whatever you tell her will be known by everyone in Deer Lodge by supper time." Tabitha couldn't help but smile. "I'll bear that in mind." They enjoyed a pleasant meal, during which Garrett told her more about the ranch and his plans for expanding his herd of cattle. He spoke with passion about the land, about his dreams of building something that would last. "I came out here with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning desire to own land," he admitted. "My father was a tenant farmer in Pennsylvania who lost everything when the landowner decided to sell to a factory. I swore I'd never be at another man's mercy that way again." "It took courage to come so far on your own," Tabitha observed. He shrugged. "No more than it took for you to travel across the country to marry a stranger." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Tabitha felt a connection that went beyond their practical arrangement. This man understood what it meant to leave everything behind in search of something better. After lunch, Garrett showed her around the town, the general store where she could purchase supplies, the small church where they would be married if she agreed, the school where any children they might have would be educated. Everywhere they went, people greeted them warmly, though Tabitha was acutely aware of the curious glances directed her way. "There's one more place I'd like to show you," Garrett said as the afternoon waned, "if you're not too tired." He led her to a small rise just outside of town, where a lone oak tree stood silhouetted against the sky. From this vantage point, they could see not only the town but also the surrounding valley, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's breathtaking," Tabitha said, turning slowly to take in the panoramic view. "This is where I decided to stay," Garrett told her, his voice quiet with memory. "I was passing through, hadn't planned on stopping for more than a night. But I walked up here at sunrise, saw this view, and knew I'd found where I belonged." He glanced at her. "I come here sometimes when I need to think or make important decisions." The significance of him bringing her to this place wasn't lost on Tabitha. He was sharing something deeply personal, a glimpse into his inner life. "Thank you for showing me," she said softly. "Tabitha," he began, turning to face her fully. I know this is sudden, we've only just met in person, but I want you to know that I meant every word in my letters. I'm looking for a partner, not just a wife, someone to share my life with, to build something meaningful together. He took a deep breath. If you need more time to decide, I understand, but I want you to know that I'm ready to make our arrangement official whenever you are. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache. Here was a good man offering her everything she had dreamed of: security, respect, the chance for a real home. Yet the secret she carried made her hesitate. Garrett, she began, then faltered. There are things about me you don't know. His expression remained steady. We all have pasts, Tabitha. What matters to me is who you are now and who we might become together. Some pasts follow you, she whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her left shoulder through the fabric of her dress. He noticed the gesture but didn't comment on it. Instead, he reached out slowly and took her hand. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone anymore, not if you don't want to. The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. For a moment, she was tempted to tell him everything about the orphanage, about the wealthy collector who had purchased her when she was 17. About the 3 years she had spent as part of his collection before she managed to escape, about the tattoo that marked her as someone's property. But fear held her back. She had come too far, risked too much to lose this chance at a new life. I need a little more time, she said finally, but I'm inclined to accept your proposal. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. That's all I can ask for. They walked back to town as the light began to fade, his hand occasionally brushing against hers in a way that sent unexpected warmth through her. At Mrs. Hollister's gate, he paused. There's a social at the church tomorrow evening, he said. Dancing, food, that sort of thing. Would you care to accompany me? Might be a good way to meet more of the townspeople. I'd like that, Tabitha replied, surprised to find she meant it. He smiled again, tipped his hat, and left her with a promise to collect her at 6 the following evening. That night, as she prepared for bed, Tabitha found herself humming softly, a habit she had abandoned years ago when life had given her little to be happy about. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she could belong, a man she could trust. If only her secret could remain hidden. The church social proved to be a lively affair, with nearly the entire population of Deer Lodge in attendance. Tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked dishes, a small band played cheerful tunes, and children darted between the adults in games of tag. Garrett kept Tabitha close, introducing her to so many people she quickly lost track of names. Everyone's very welcoming, she observed as they filled their plates with food. They're curious more than anything, Garrett replied with a chuckle. It's not every day a bachelor my age suddenly shows up with a beautiful woman from back east. The compliment made her blush. I'm hardly the only newcomer. I noticed several other unfamiliar faces. The territory's growing. New people arrive every month looking for opportunity. He guided her to a table where a few couples were already seated. These are some of my neighbors, the Petersons, the Andersons, and Henry Blake and his daughter Julia. Conversation flowed easily as they ate, with most of the questions directed at Tabitha. Where in Boston had she lived? Did she have family? How was she finding Montana? She answered carefully, giving just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything that might raise questions about her past. You dance, Miss Turner? Mr. Peterson asked as the band struck up a livelier tune. Aye. It's been some time, she admitted. Nonsense, Mrs. Peterson said with a warm smile. It's like riding a horse, you never truly forget. Before she knew it, Garrett was leading her to the cleared space serving as a dance floor. He placed one hand respectfully at her waist, took her other hand in his, and guided her into a simple waltz. I should warn you, he said, his eyes twinkling, I'm not much of a dancer. But he moved with the same natural grace he showed on horseback, leading her confidently through the steps. Tabitha found herself relaxing into his arms, the music and motion carrying her away from her worries for a few precious minutes. You dance beautifully, he murmured near her ear. As do you, despite your protests, she replied, enjoying the warmth of his hand at her waist. They danced several more times throughout the evening, and Tabitha found herself laughing more than she had in years. The people of Deer Lodge were direct but kind, genuinely interested in making her feel welcome. By the time Garrett escorted her back to Mrs. Hollister's cottage, her cheeks ached from smiling. "I had a wonderful time," she told him sincerely as they stood on the small porch. "As did I." He hesitated, then asked, "Would tomorrow be too soon to give me your answer?" "I thought perhaps we could ride out to the ranch again, see a bit more of the land." Tabitha took a deep breath. In the 3 days since she had arrived in Deer Lodge, she had seen enough to know that Garrett Quinn was everything he had claimed to be in his letters: honest, hardworking, kind. The life he offered was one she desperately wanted. "I don't need to wait until tomorrow," she said quietly. "My answer is yes, Garrett. I would be honored to become your wife." The joy that transformed his face made her heart skip. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers, their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. "I'll speak to Reverend Collins tomorrow," he said when they parted. "Would 2 weeks from Sunday give you enough time to prepare?" "More than enough," she assured him. That night, as she lay in bed, Tabitha touched her lips where Garrett had kissed her, a mixture of happiness and anxiety swirling within her. She had committed to becoming his wife, to sharing his life and his home. But could she truly share herself, her whole self, including the dark parts of her past and the physical reminder of it etched into her skin? The answer eluded her as she drifted into uneasy sleep. The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Garrett brought her to the ranch several times, showing her the operations and introducing her to the handful of men who worked for him. Tabitha found herself increasingly drawn to the peaceful beauty of the place, imagining a life there with gardens she would tend, meals she would prepare, perhaps children who would play beneath the big oak tree near the house. In town, the women of Deer Lodge embraced her with surprising enthusiasm. Mrs. Peterson helped her select fabric for a wedding dress, while Mrs. Hargrove insisted on providing the perfect hat to complement it. Even Mrs. Hollister got involved, organizing a small gathering of ladies to help with the sewing. "It's not every day our most eligible bachelor gets married," Mrs. Peterson explained as they worked. "The whole town's invested in your happiness." Tabitha was touched by their acceptance, though she remained careful to keep her clothes buttoned high and her secrets close. The wedding dress they created was beautiful in its simplicity, a cream-colored gown with a high collar and long sleeves that would cover her completely. Garrett, for his part, threw himself into preparing the ranch house for her arrival. He hired a woman from town to give it a thorough cleaning and purchased several new pieces of furniture, including a dressing table for her bedroom that he proudly showed her during one of her visits. "I thought you might like a private space," he explained, somewhat bashfully. For your womanly things, the consideration behind the gesture moved her deeply. "It's perfect, Garrett, thank you." As the wedding day approached, however, Tabitha's anxiety grew. The more she came to care for Garrett, and she was startled by how quickly and deeply her affection had developed, the more terrified she became of his potential reaction to her tattoo and the story behind it. What if he rejected her once he discovered the truth? What if the townspeople who had welcomed her so warmly turned against her? The night before the wedding, she sat alone in her room at Mrs. Hollister's, the pearl ring Garrett had given her glinting in the lamplight. She had begun wearing it after accepting his proposal, and the small weight of it on her finger had become a comfort. Now she twisted it nervously, torn between joy at the future that awaited her and fear that it might be snatched away. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Hollister standing there, a concerned expression on her kind face. "May I come in, dear? You seemed troubled at supper." Tabitha stepped aside to allow the older woman to enter, then closed the door behind her. "Just wetting nerves, I suppose, Mrs." Hollister sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. Come sit. I've seen enough brides to know when one is carrying more than just the usual jitters. Something about the woman's gentle manner broke through Tabitha's carefully maintained composure. She sank onto the bed, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Hollister said softly, taking Tabitha's hand. "What is it? Are you having doubts about Garrett?" "No," Tabitha said quickly. "Garrett he's wonderful, more than I dared hope for, it's just—" She trailed off, unable to find the words. "You're afraid he won't accept something about you," Mrs. Hollister guessed with surprising insight. "Something from your past, perhaps." Tabitha looked up in shock. "How did you? I've lived a long time, child, seen many things. And I recognized something in you from the moment you arrived, a wariness that comes from having been hurt." She squeezed Tabitha's hand. "You don't have to tell me what it is, but let me tell you something about Garrett Quinn. That man has one of the truest hearts I've ever known. Whatever you're carrying, he's strong enough to help you bear it." The words sank into Tabitha's troubled mind like a bomb. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it," Mrs. Hollister said simply. "Trust him with your truth, whatever it may be. Marriage built on secrets is like a house built on sand. It cannot stand when the storms come." After Mrs. Hollister left, Tabitha stood before the mirror in her nightgown, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her had changed in the weeks since she arrived in Deer Lodge. There was color in her cheeks, a brightness to her eyes that had been missing for years. This place, these people, especially Garrett, had begun to heal something within her that she had thought broken beyond repair. Could she trust him with the final piece of herself she had kept hidden? Did she have a choice if she truly wanted a marriage that was more than just a convenient arrangement? The answer came to her as she climbed into bed. Before they spoke their vows, before they became husband and wife, she would tell Garrett everything. If he rejected her, at least she would know she had been honest, and if he accepted her despite her past, despite her marks, then perhaps she had truly found her home at last. Wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers through the open window of Tabitha's room. Mrs. Hollister bustled in early, helping her bathe and dress with motherly attention to every detail. "You look absolutely radiant," the older woman declared when Tabitha was finally ready, the cream-colored gown setting off her auburn hair, which had been arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. "I need to speak with Garrett before the ceremony," Tabitha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Alone," Mrs. Hollister gave her a knowing look. "I'll send word to him to come early. You can use the parlor for privacy." When Garrett arrived an hour before the ceremony was to begin, he was dressed in a new black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. He stopped short when he saw Tabitha waiting for him in the parlor, his expression one of wonder. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, her hands twisting nervously in the folds of her skirt. "Garrett, there's something I need to tell you, something important." Concern immediately replaced the admiration in his eyes. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, nothing like that." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit. This may take some time." He sat, watching her with a mixture of confusion and growing worry as she paced before him, trying to find the right words to begin. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," she finally said, stopping to face him directly. "About my past, about who I am." "Tabitha, whatever it is, please," she interrupted gently. "Let me finish before you respond." When he nodded, she took a deep breath and continued. "I told you I was an orphan, raised in a Boston charity home. That much is true, but what I didn't tell you is what happened when I was 17. The words came more easily now, as if having made the decision to speak had broken a dam within her. "A man came to the orphanage looking for girls to work as housemaids. At least, that's what the matron told us. 3 of us were selected: myself, another girl named Elizabeth, and a girl called Sarah." Garrett remained silent, his eyes never leaving her face as she spoke. "The man's name was Cornelius Blackwell. He was one of Boston's wealthiest merchants, respected in society, invited to all the best homes." Her voice grew bitter. What no one knew, or perhaps what people chose not to see, was that he had a particular collection. Young women, all orphans or otherwise without family, all marked with elaborate tattoos that he commissioned from an artist he kept in his employ. Understanding began to dawn in Garrett's eyes, but still he did not speak. We weren't housemaids. We were possessions, displayed like fine artwork at private gatherings for his equally wealthy friends to admire. He didn't touch us in the way you might think. His interest wasn't carnal, it was aesthetic. He saw us as living canvases for his artist's work. She turned away, unable to face him as she continued. I lived in his house for 3 years. 3 years of being exhibited, of being told how lucky I was to have such a comfortable home, such fine clothes, when the alternative was working in a factory or worse. She heard Garrett shift in his chair but didn't turn around. The tattoo begins on my left shoulder, she said quietly. Roses and thorns, intricately detailed, cascading down my back. It took months to complete, hours of lying still while the artist worked with his needles and ink. It was excruciating. Now she did turn, needing to see his reaction. I escaped with the help of a kitchen maid who smuggled me out during a delivery. I had saved enough from the small allowance Blackwell gave us to purchase a train ticket west. I worked my way across the country, taking positions as a governess or shop assistant in small towns where no one would think to look for me. When I saw your advertisement, I thought, I hoped. Her voice broke. Garrett stood slowly, his expression unreadable. May I speak now? She nodded, bracing herself for rejection. First, he said, his voice low and controlled, I want to thank you for trusting me with the truth. He took a step toward her. Second, I want you to know that nothing you've said changes how I feel about you. Nothing. Tears filled her eyes. You can't mean that. You don't know what the tattoo looks like, how extensive it is, and the shame of being part of such a collection. The shame is his, not yours, Garrett said firmly. You were a child, Tabitha, barely more than a child. He took advantage of your vulnerability, your lack of options. The fact that you escaped, that you survived and made your way across the country alone, speaks to your courage and strength. Those are qualities I admire, not things I would condemn. But the tattoo is part of you, he finished for her. Like a scar from a wound you didn't deserve, it doesn't define you. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for a partner, someone to share my life with. In these past weeks, I've come to care for you deeply, Tabitha, not because you're flawless, but because you're real. Because despite whatever hardships you've faced, you've remained kind and strong. The sincerity in his eyes undid her completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the burden of her secret lifted. I was so afraid you'd send me away once you knew. Never, he said softly, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. Never that. Her heart swelled with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Garrett, I think I'm falling in love with you. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I know I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha Turner, and if you'll still have me, I'd be honored to become your husband today. Yes, she whispered, overwhelmed by the acceptance she saw in his eyes. Yes, I still want to marry you. He leaned down to kiss her then, a kiss filled with promise and understanding that left her breathless. Now, he said when they parted, I believe we have a wedding to attend. Unless you'd rather postpone, Tabitha shook her head, her heart lighter than it had been in years. No, I'm ready to become Mrs. Tabitha Quinn. The ceremony itself was simple but moving, held in the small church that was filled to capacity with townsfolk eager to witness Garrett Quinn finally taking a bride. Tabitha walked down the aisle alone, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar, his face alight with joy. When they spoke their vows, her voice was clear and certain, all doubt having been washed away by his acceptance of her truth. Afterward, the entire town gathered for a celebration at the hotel, with food and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As Garrett led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Tabitha felt a peace she had never known before. Happy Mrs. Quinn, he murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back. More than I ever thought possible, she replied truthfully. It was late when they finally left the celebration, boarding Garrett's wagon for the journey to the ranch that was now their home. As they rolled away from town, he reached over to take her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her wedding band. I have something to tell you, he said, his voice serious enough to make her heart skip. Something I should have mentioned before. Anxiety flickered briefly before she quelled it. What is it? The cattle rustling I mentioned before. It's more complicated than I let on. He kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. For the past year, someone's been systematically targeting smaller ranches in the valley. The Wilkersons lost nearly half their herd. The Petersons lost a third. I've been working with some of the other ranchers to try to catch whoever's responsible, but so far we've had no luck. Tabitha frowned. Why are you telling me this now? Because it might be dangerous, he said honestly. Whoever's behind it is organized and ruthless. Last month, one of the Wilkerson boys was shot when he stumbled across rustlers on their land. He survived, but he trailed off, then continued more firmly. I need you to be aware, to be cautious. If you ever see strangers near the ranch, don't approach them. Come find me or Daniel immediately. The seriousness in his tone alarmed her. Do you think we're in danger? Probably not, he assured her quickly. My operation is larger, better guarded, but I can't stand by while my neighbors are picked apart, which means I'm actively working against whoever's behind this. That could make us targets. He squeezed her hand. I'm sorry to burden you with this on our wedding night, but I promised myself there would be no secrets between us. You trusted me with your truth. I owe you the same honesty. Touched by his concern for her safety and his commitment to transparency, Tabitha squeezed his hand in return. Thank you for telling me. We'll face whatever comes together. The ranch house was warmly lit when they arrived, with a fire burning in the hearth and fresh flowers on the table, touches that Daniel and the housekeeper had arranged as a wedding gift. Garrett carried her across the threshold with a laugh, setting her down gently in what was now their shared home. Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn, he said softly. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Garrett's fingers traced the intricate pattern of roses and thorns that marked her back. His touch was gentle, reverent almost, as he followed the lines of ink that had caused her so much pain and shame. It's beautiful, he whispered against her hair. Not because of what it represents or how it came to be, but because it's part of you. Tears stung her eyes at his acceptance, at the tenderness with which he treated the physical reminder of her past. I never thought anyone could look at it that way. Then I'm honored to be the first, he replied, pressing a kiss to her shoulder where the tattoo began, but I won't be the last. Someday, when you're ready, you'll see it through my eyes, not as a mark of ownership, but as proof of your survival, your strength. In the safety of his arms, Tabitha began to believe that perhaps he was right. Perhaps she could reclaim even this, the most visible scar from her past. With Garrett's love and the new life they were building together, anything seemed possible. The early weeks of their marriage passed in a haze of happiness as Tabitha settled into life as Mrs. Quinn. She threw herself into making the ranch house truly a home, rearranging furniture, adding touches that reflected her tastes, and planning a larger garden for the following spring. Garrett watched her transformations with obvious pleasure, often catching her by the waist as she bustled past to steal a kiss or simply tell her how much he appreciated her presence. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, with Garrett working the ranch during the day while Tabitha managed the household. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch or before the fire, sharing the details of their day, reading aloud to each other from their growing collection of books, or simply enjoying a companionable silence. At night, they discovered each other with increasing intimacy, Tabitha gradually shedding the self-consciousness about her tattoo, as Garrett consistently treated it and her with tenderness and respect. The issue of the cattle rustlers, however, cast a shadow over their happiness. Throughout the summer, Reports continued to come in of smaller ranches being hit, always with the same pattern, a few head of cattle taken at a time. Never enough to ruin a rancher completely, but sufficient to cause significant hardship over time. Garrett spent long hours meeting with other ranchers and organizing night patrols, often returning home late and exhausted. "We're missing something," he confided to Tabitha one evening as she massaged the tension from his shoulders. "It's like they know our movements, know exactly when to strike." "Could there be someone in town passing information?" she suggested. "Someone who hears the ranchers talking at the saloon, perhaps." Garrett paused, considering. "That's not a bad theory. The timing of the thefts does often seem to follow our strategy meetings." He twisted to look at her. "You've got a sharp mind, Mrs. Quinn." She smiled at the compliment. "I've had plenty of practice observing people and situations. It was a necessary skill in my previous life." The next day, Garrett shared Tabitha's theory with the other ranchers, and they agreed to change their tactics. Instead of openly discussing their patrol schedules, they would meet privately at various ranches to plan. They also decided to spread false information in town about their movements, hoping to catch the rustlers in a trap. It was during this time that Tabitha first noticed the stranger in town. She had gone to the general store for supplies when a tall man with a pockmarked face entered, his eyes scanning the interior before settling briefly on her. Something about his calculating gaze sent a chill down her spine. He purchased only a few items: tobacco, ammunition, and some canned goods before leaving without speaking to anyone. "Who was that man?" she asked Mrs. Peterson, who was also shopping. "Don't know," the woman replied with a frown. "Been seeing him around town lately, keeps to himself mostly. Stays at the hotel, I hear." Tabitha mentioned the encounter to Garrett that evening, describing the man and the unease she had felt in his presence. "I'll ask around," he promised. "Might be nothing, plenty of strangers pass through, but with everything that's been happening, it's worth looking into." A week later, Garrett's investigation bore fruit. "His name's Jeb Harker," he told Tabitha as they prepared for bed. "Arrived in town about 2 months ago, claimed to be looking for ranch work, but hasn't taken any of the jobs offered. Spends a lot of time in the saloon, especially when ranchers are there. Daniel says he asks a lot of questions about local operations, size of herds, locations of grazing land, that sort of thing." "You think he's connected to the rustling?" Tabitha asked. "Maybe, or he could just be a drifter. But I've asked some of the men to keep an eye on him, see where he goes, who he talks to." He pulled her close. "I don't want you going into town alone for a while, all right, not until we figure out what's happening." Though she bristled slightly at the restriction, Tabitha recognized the genuine concern behind it. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful too, if these people are as dangerous as you think." "I promise," he said, kissing her forehead. "I've got too much to live for now to take foolish risks." The situation came to a head sooner than either of them expected. 3 nights later, Garrett was awakened by the sound of pounding on their front door. He was out of bed instantly, pulling on his trousers and reaching for the rifle he kept nearby. "Stay here," he told Tabitha, his voice tense, but she was already reaching for her robe. "I'm coming with you." They descended the stairs together to find Daniel on their porch, his face grim in the light of the lamp Garrett had grabbed. "They hit the Wilkersons again," Daniel said without preamble. "But this time old man Wilkerson was ready, shot one of them, but they got away." Wilkerson recognized him, though it was that stranger from town, Harker. Garrett's expression hardened. "Is Wilkerson all right?" "Shaken up but unharmed. Sheriff's forming a posse to go after Harker and whoever's working with him. Asked if you'd join." Daniel glanced at Tabitha. "I told him I'd ask, but that you might not want to leave Mrs. Quinn alone." Garrett turned to look at Tabitha, conflict evident in his eyes. He wanted to help, to be part of bringing these men to justice, but he was also deeply protective of her. "Go," she said firmly. "Daniel can stay at the house with me if it would make you feel better." I'll get some of the hands to patrol the perimeter too, Daniel added. Mrs. Quinn will be safe. Still, Garrett hesitated. I don't like leaving you. I'll be fine, she assured him, though fear curled in her stomach at the thought of him pursuing dangerous men in the dark. Just promise me you'll come back safely. He cupped her face in his hands. I promise. Then he was moving, dressing quickly and gathering his weapons. Before he left, he pulled Tabitha into a fierce embrace. Lock the doors behind us. Don't open them for anyone but me or Daniel, understand? She nodded, standing at the door until his figure disappeared into the night before carefully securing the house as he had instructed. Daniel arranged for 2 ranch hands to patrol outside while he kept watch in the kitchen, rifle across his lap. Tabitha tried to sleep but found it impossible, her mind racing with worry for Garrett. Instead, she made coffee and joined Daniel, the two of them sitting in tense silence as the hours crept by. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the sky when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Daniel was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with his rifle ready. It's the boss, he said with palpable relief. And he's alone, which means he's not being pursued. Tabitha rushed to unlock the door, nearly sagging with relief when Garrett stepped inside, tired but unharmed. Thank God, she breathed, throwing her arms around him. He held her tightly for a moment, before gently setting her aside to place his rifle on the rack by the door. It's over, he said wearily. We caught Harker and 2 others about 10 miles south, driving a small herd of Wilkerson cattle toward the territorial border. There was a firefight. Harker's dead, the other 2 are in the sheriff's custody. Did they tell you who's behind it all? Daniel asked. Garrett nodded grimly. James Buchanan. Daniel whistled low. The banker, that explains a lot. He's been orchestrating the whole operation, Garrett explained for Tabitha's benefit. Using the rustling to force smaller ranchers into financial trouble, then offering loans with terms that essentially gave him control of their land. The sheriff's on his way to arrest him now. Will the Wilkersons and others get their cattle back? Tabitha asked. Some of it. A lot has already been sold across the border. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But at least it's over. The valley can get back to normal now. Over the next few weeks, Deer Lodge buzzed with the scandal of James Buchanan's arrest and the revelation of his scheme. Many of the affected ranchers banded together to hire a lawyer from Helena to ensure the banker faced the full consequences of his crimes. With the immediate threat removed, life at Quinn Ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm, though Garrett did increase security measures, including hiring 2 additional hands to help patrol their extensive property. As autumn painted the countryside in gold and crimson, Tabitha found herself making another significant adjustment to her new life, the realization that she was expecting a child. The first signs had been subtle: a persistent fatigue, sensitivity to certain smells, a missed monthly cycle. But when the morning sickness began, there was no denying the truth. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Garrett. On a crisp October evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, she said softly, watching his face. For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, a smile of such pure joy it made her heart ache. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. When? Late spring, I think. May, perhaps. She bit her lip nervously. Are you happy? In answer, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. Happy doesn't begin to describe it, he whispered against her hair. Tabitha, you've given me everything I ever wanted: a true partner, a home filled with love, and now a child. I didn't know it was possible to feel this blessed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months, with Tabitha's body changing to accommodate the new life growing within her. Garrett was endearingly protective, insisting she rest frequently and taking over many of her household duties, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. The women of Deer Lodge rallied around her, bringing gifts for the baby and sharing advice from their own experiences of childbearing on the frontier. As her belly swelled, Tabitha found herself contemplating the future with both hope and trepidation. Would her child inherit her auburn hair, Garrett's blue eyes? Would the child ever ask about the intricate designs that marked her back? How would she explain her past in a way that a child could understand? What troubles you? Garrett asked one evening, finding her standing by the nursery window, hand resting on her rounded stomach. I was thinking about the baby, she admitted, about what we'll tell him or her about my past. Garrett came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her and his hands joining hers on her belly. We'll tell the truth, he said simply, in a way appropriate for a child, of course, that their mother survived something difficult and found the courage to seek a better life. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of, and the tattoo, she asked quietly, is part of your story but not the whole of it. He turned her gently to face him. Our child will know you as I know you, as a woman of extraordinary strength and kindness. The rest is just details. His unwavering faith in her, in them, never failed to humble her. I love you, she whispered, leaning into his embrace, so much more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, he replied, more with each passing day. Spring returned to the valley, bringing with it new life in every corner of the ranch. Calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures, wildflowers dotted the hillsides, and the garden Tabitha had planned during the winter months began to sprout tender green shoots. As May approached, the nursery was ready, filled with furniture Garrett had crafted himself and linens sewn by Tabitha and the women of the town. Their son arrived on a warm afternoon in late May, after a labor that tested Tabitha's endurance but ultimately rewarded her with the most profound joy she had ever known. As she held the tiny, red-faced infant in her arms, Garrett sitting beside her on the bed with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, she felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle. He's perfect, Garrett whispered, running a gentle finger over their son's downy head. What shall we name him? Tabitha asked, though they had discussed possibilities for months. Thomas, Garrett suggested, after your father. The choice touched her deeply. She had shared with him the few fragmented memories she had of her parents, who had died in a tenement fire when she was only 4. That he would honor her father in naming their son spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. Thomas Quinn, she said softly, testing the name. I think it suits him. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under Garrett's careful management. They added a new section to the house, expanded their herd, and hired additional hands to help with the increased workload. Tabitha found her place not just as a wife and mother, but as an integral part of the ranch's operations, keeping the books and even learning to ride well enough to occasionally accompany Garrett when he checked the herd. The tattoo that had once been her greatest shame gradually became simply another part of her, like the scar on Garrett's arm from a childhood accident or the tiny lines that were beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. She still kept it covered in public, but at home, especially in the privacy of their bedroom, she no longer felt the need to hide. Garrett's acceptance had helped her find her own. When Thomas was 3, Tabitha gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Margaret. The Quinn family and ranch continued to grow and thrive, becoming one of the most respected operations in the territory. Garrett's fair business practices and Tabitha's involvement in town affairs earned them the admiration of their neighbors, while their obvious devotion to each other and their children served as an example of what a true partnership could be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Tabitha with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. As she opened it, she found a small folded paper tucked inside as well. Unfolding it, she read a message in Garrett's familiar handwriting, to my beloved Tabitha, who had the courage to trust me with her past and the strength to build our future. Every day with you is a gift I never thought to deserve. Forever yours, Garrett." Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at him. "How did I get so fortunate?" she whispered. He smiled, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "I ask myself the same question every day." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened orphan to a marked woman fleeing her past, to a mail-order bride taking a desperate chance on a stranger, to a beloved wife and mother surrounded by family in a home filled with love. "Penny for your thoughts," Garrett murmured, his arm draped comfortably across her waist. "I was thinking about fate," she replied, "about how sometimes the most painful paths lead us exactly where we're meant to be." He propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the moonlight that filtered through their window. "Any regrets?" She reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face, marveling at how familiar and yet still thrilling his touch remained after a decade together. "Not a single one. Every step, every choice, every hardship led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret any of it? Then we are both fortunate beyond measure," he said, leaning down to kiss her with the same tenderness that had marked their very first kiss. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Tabitha thought of the mysterious tattoo that had once defined her existence. It was still there, of course, roses and thorns forever etched into her skin. But Garrett had kept his promise. He had never asked her to explain it further than she already had, never pressed for details she wasn't ready to share. He had simply protected her secret, loved her through it, and helped her reclaim her body and her story as her own. In doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be fully herself, mysterious tattoo and all, secure in the knowledge that she was accepted, respected, and deeply, completely loved. And in the heart of Montana territory, on a ranch built with dreams and determination, Tabitha Turner Quinn knew she had finally found her true home.